Hey guys, thanks for listening to Kinda Dating, the comedy dating podcast, where influential guests and I break down the dating world and try to figure out why the do we all have commitment issues. Today's topic is reprogramming your love life. Say what? Yeah, let's do it. Hello, Kinda Daters. I'm Natasha Chandel. You're listening to Kinda Dating. Yo, I just got back from a trip to India. We are recording this mid-January. It'll probably air end of January, but feel like I just got over my jet lag. What was supposed to be just a regular fun little trip where I was taking my partner Luis to India for the first time turned into a wedding trip, which you know happened. It's a thing that happened. Recently, we got engaged. And as much as I love India, I love it. It is my home. I adore it. I dream every year of going home. Man, it is a rough place for wedding shopping. Firstly, obviously, we had to do a lot in 2 weeks, but geez, I had like PTSD from all my negotiations with vendors at the stores. And if you know, you know. This is really one of those hashtags. If you know, you know. I had 2 nightmares when I came back about those negotiations. So now I'm just trying to shake it off. And here we are, in new 2024. You know how I feel about New Year's and New Year's resolutions. I don't plan on making them. But I do have some fun news to announce to you. So this episode is airing at the end of January 2024. And this is a reminder that we have changed actually our release schedule. So instead of being a weekly podcast or having a weekly podcast drop, we're going to go to every other week. Because yes, your girl finally just got hitched or is getting hitched. So I need some time to plan shit. It's not happening in this country. It's a lot of work. Please give me a break. But we are not leaving you hanging. We have launched a YouTube channel at the start of this month, and we have episodes dropping there weekly, sometimes even twice a week. Yeah, you never know what little treat you might get. So please subscribe to our channel there and support us. I know. I should have done it a long time ago, but listen, we're a small indie operation over here and we work other jobs to support doing this. So please support us wherever you can. We love you. We love this podcast. We want to keep going. So subscribe to that channel. It's youtube.com/kinda dating. Or I don't know, just search Kinda Dating Podcast on YouTube. You'll find it. You know where to find us. But please support us and tell your friends. We have a great guest. I'm excited to have her on. She is a licensed counselor and relationship and intimacy expert. I want to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. Hello.
Hello, Natasha. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I love your background because you have your own podcast and
Thank
it's
you.
so like set up so perfectly. I love it.
Thank you. Yes, it is very relatable what we
Yeah.
do on my podcast and also what you do on yours. So I love that.
Thank you. Well, we ask everybody the first question on this podcast, which is single or in a relationship.
Single as that's what I am. Not just single, single as
I love it. I love
Yes.
it. I love it. Are you getting out there, chilling? What do you have a New Year's resolution about this shit?
I don't do that
Good.
shit either. So no, that's not a thing. But I was thinking, I was just telling my friend the other day, I'm like, okay, it's not a resolution, but I'm like, let's reprioritize. I work a ton. So I'm like, let's just kind of shift this so I can, make time for that. And I'm like, what are we 2 weeks in? And I have made zero time for it. So I'm like, this is why we don't do resolutions because I suck at them. So no, I'm not out there, but that's the plan, maybe.
I don't blame you at all because I actually say I feel like New Year's resolutions are like the first time you have sex. There's like all this like anticipation and hope, and it lasts all of 1 minute.
Right.
Right.
So
Like,
disappointing
it's
every
okay.
single time.
Every time. But it's okay. The one thing I tell people is like, and I don't know how you feel, I'm sure you feel the same way. I know that we like to have like a marker. So it's nice to have like New Year's as a marker, but every day is a new opportunity
For sure.
to try something new. So it doesn't have to be like, okay, I missed this New Year's resolution timeline. So now I have to wait till the next year. It's like, just try again tomorrow.
Totally. And that is totally my thought. And throughout the year, I'm always, trying to do new things, trying to evolve, trying to pivot. So I absolutely agree, but clearly not with my dating life. So I will get my ass in check with that.
It's okay, man. We all have a thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
trust me.
I have a few, but yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
all of us, for sure. And also, like, we have to prioritize our careers too, especially as women. It gets hard. Like, I
Yeah.
struggle all the time because now that I'm in a relationship, I feel like, I put that career stuff sometimes on the back,
Right.
because I want to make time for the relationship. And then I have to like stop myself and go, wait, wait, wait. Like, what would I normally do in this situation? So it's a balance all the time.
Sure.
So, you talk about reprogramming relationships, and many of us, I feel like, struggle and have struggled. I know I have a lot in the past to not just find, but like maintain good relationships.
Mhm.
So, I want to ask you, what the is wrong with us?
Yeah, valid question. And it ties into our programming. And that is the very thing. So many of us struggle with relationships, as you're saying, either obtaining or maintaining these healthy, also whatever the that means, right? But fulfilling, content, safe would kind of be what I tie into healthy, is that we feel mostly fulfilled. Nothing is ever going to be perfect, but there's some contentment there. We feel safe for the most part. But a lot of us struggle to find that. We either feel like we have to pick one or the other. We're either safe and bored, or we're excited, but then we're in the toxic cycle every day, which is, definitely takes a toll. And so working with clients, whether individuals or couples, for years and years, and knowing that traditional couple counseling is really rooted in communication skills. The first time a couple sits down, okay, what are you guys here for? To improve our communication. That is one of the biggest societal misconceptions about why relationships don't work. It does not have anything. Okay, that's not fair. It is not all about communication. Of course, that ties into it, but that is so naive, so ignorant, and doing us all a disservice. And so, what really is going on is the way we are programmed from the day, our first day on this earth, and then the way that it was programmed in childhood, but then the way it's been perpetuated throughout our romantic relationships as a result of that.
Yeah, I think everybody thinks that it's a one solution or one problem that is the root of everything, and it never is. It's a very
Right.
complex issue of why any relationship struggles, or what the formula is. That's one of the reasons I hate that. Um, because it is like you kind of have to have a multi-pronged approach to improving relationships and keeping them, because we're just complex beings that way.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by, like, how is our life and our love life programmed? Like, are we computers? What are you talking
Well,
about?
that's the analogy I use, but I've been asked to stop using it because I don't know anything about computers. And so I've had some friends be like, yo, you're not really spitting that out in the way you're intending. You might want to pick a new analogy. But yes, that is the way that I describe it, is the way that a computer is programmed, whether it's putting wires in the back or coding in whatever. When you put a certain input in, that is going to result in a certain output. So when we think about our programming, what I mean by this is that all of our early experiences with our primary caregivers really set the stage for what we come to believe about relationships, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about others, and relationships as a whole. And research supports that within about the first 2 to 3 weeks of infancy, infants are already imitating what they're learning and seeing in their environment. So really think about that. If within a couple weeks, we're already showing up in the way that our environments have shaped us, imagine what 16, 17, 18 years is going to do that has been so deeply ingrained in us. And what I mean by that is the way that our caregivers show up. So whether they show up consistently as warm, nurturing, attentive, or they show up consistently as chaotic or abusive, neglectful, and then everything along the spectrum of that. But the way that they are repeatedly showing up is the way that forms our worldview about relationships. And so we then carry this with us. So this is all we know. This is the only template we have. We are not then in adult relationships intentionally trying to be or trying to do up things. This is really all we know. And a big part of that is because humans are designed for safety and connection and belonging. And that is inherent. And so we are then trying to navigate our worlds to figure out how can I obtain that while also managing the distress of whatever my caregiver is bringing into the picture. And that's where we then develop a lot of those dysfunctional behaviors that we carry with us. And so, yes, in a lot of ways, that is exactly what I mean. It is whatever is, typed, coded into us is the way we're operating present day. And it happens without our awareness or our consent, which is one of the most difficult aspects of programming.
So it's our parents' fault.
Yeah. So your parents you up is what I'm trying to say.
They suck.
I don't actually believe that, to be clear. Intergenerational trauma is a real bitch, right? So it is passed down their programming, their parents, their grandparents, like has all been passed down. And if it hasn't been brought to your attention, which a lot of people aren't directly aware of it, then what are we going to do? We don't know any better, so we can't do better. And so, well, yes, in a lot of ways, parents do influence it. I like to hold space for the and there. Some parents really are up, and okay, fine. But I would say a lot of parents did the best they could, and they might have really done some damage.
Yeah, I actually did this course in university, I remember, called developmental psychobiology. It always really, really stuck in my head. It was just this one semester course I did, but it was on the development of just stress and anxiety in the first 3 years of a
Yeah.
person's life. And I was so mind blown at the information I learned that basically, because I've always thought in general that a lot of people should not be parents.
Yeah.
I really feel
Knowledge.
like I used to live in New York City. I used to walk, get on trains. I used to see people just screaming at their kids, just doing normal kid things. And I was like, why are you like, why do you have a kid if you have no time? You're so irritated. Like, and I get it. Kids also make that make that worse. But
Right.
it's just this idea that like maybe you weren't equipped in the first place. And that course I remember really stuck with me because it was as simple as, you know, you hear a kid cry and some people have the thought that, well, let him keep crying because that's how they will learn to self-soothe. But
Right.
there's a balance to that, right? Coming back to the beginning of this where we keep saying there's some balance to everything,
Mhm.
that if you let them keep crying too long, they develop a type of stress like reaction, and it changes their actual homeostases
Yep.
that like affects them through their whole life because they believe nobody will come for them. At the same time, coddling them too much also can you up. So it's like I know it's like an impossible thing in a sense to be a parent.
Right.
But I remember that course really kind of woke me up, and I've always often told my friends about it where I was just like, hey, maybe now meet your kid's need because otherwise they're gonna get like, grow up with a lot of anxiety and abandonment issues that, like you said, is not something that they consented to. It wasn't something, you know,
Yeah.
they made happen.
Yeah, they were completely powerless to it. And that is
Yeah.
one of the hardest things is when our core beliefs develop, it is rooted in that we were subjected to these environments and to these people who often had a lot of their own processed trauma. And as you're saying, maybe had no business being parents to begin with, or just weren't equipped. They didn't know any better. And so you're absolutely right that so that's a good example of allowing a child to cry it out, as they say, to teach self-soothing. And the research is so against that and actually talks about in order to build resiliency in a child, they have to know that somebody's going to show up when they need them. So if they're in distress and they have a caregiver who is able to show up and provide support, that is how we become resilient, because then the belief we form is that people are safe and they're going to show up when we need them. But otherwise, we develop what I call survival behaviors. And these are This ties in a lot to like attachment styles. So this is either the people pleasing, perfectionism, fawning, performative behaviors, withdrawing, avoidance, isolating, all of those behaviors that we talk about so often. That is what we start to develop because when you think about the baby that's crying it out, okay, so the nervous system is like, you got to figure something out because you can't be in this state forever. And so often that means going into like a state of dissociation, just shutting down, just paralysis, where then the parent's like, oh, thank God. See, they self-soothed. No, they completely just shut down. They shut off. And that is then what we carry with us into adulthood. And I talk about how I was about 7 years old when I remember my dad used to brag, like, she never cries. She never cries. And he said it such a badge of honor. And looking back and the work I do now, I'm like, that is just so up on so many levels. Like that little girl didn't cry because there was no point in crying or it was more dangerous to cry, right? And so that is where those behaviors develop that impact our romantic relationships.
Yeah, it's so true. As you were saying that, I was remembering, I don't think I've ever said this story on the podcast. Probably no need to, but when I was 1 years old, my parents always tell me the story that well, I was born in Dubai. And so they, I guess, took me to India to, just as like a trip. And on the way back, my dad realized he forgot my passport. And so they had to leave me with my grandma for a month in India.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like super, and I loved my grandma. I was super,
Sure.
super, super close to her. But for some reason, at 1 years old, knew what was happening. And so when I finally got back with my parents, my mom was like, for some reason, Tash, you came to me, you would not go to your dad. Like you were just so mad at him for like letting you down, I think. And it's so crazy because you think, well,
Yeah.
well, what would a 1 year old know? But we don't know exactly what happened, but we just absorbed certain energies, I'm sure. Um,
Sure.
and that was really like a very much of a marker for our relationship. I have a great
Mm,
relationship with my mom, and I would always get like immensely angry with my dad.
yeah,
And I always felt let down by him in many ways. And so, it's weird. Like, can you trace it back to that or those kinds of
for
moments? I don't
sure.
know, but
Yep.
there's something that gets etched in sort of your being.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the body keeps the score is the
Yes.
term that is used for that. And what you're describing is what we call pre-verbal trauma. So you don't have to be able to recall or verbalize what happened. Your body knows damn well what happened. And when we think about attachment styles and we think about for a child, it's about at 9 months that the attachment is solidified with their primary caregivers. So that was really traumatic for 1 year old you, for sure. That is a lot of abandonment that was, the base of your narrative now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And but when we talk about it and we talk about the fact that this is so rooted in childhood and times of our life that we didn't control, how could we even start to reprogram
Yeah. Yeah,
something
which
like that?
is which is valid, and that's also the part that's so important to me is to provide hope because the aspect with attachment styles that I think sometimes becomes a little disheartening or a little defeating is that it's like, okay, cool, you're telling me how I show up, but now what? And with the reprogramming aspect of it, there is a now what. It is identifying the activity that I take my clients through is doing a timeline from birth to present day. And so events that like you just described, we would be identifying. And we are talking about the themes that take place throughout the lifespan and how they continue to show up. But then also how we sometimes end up in relationships, or a lot of times end up in relationships with people who perpetuate those traumas because, again, it's all we know. So we are drawn to that. The brain is wired for what's familiar. So we're drawn to it and it continues to perpetuate. When we bring awareness to our programming that, okay, these are our themes, this is what continued to happen. And now let me look at my romantic relationships. Oh, yeah, that makes sense why I was drawn to this person and that person because, their tendencies mirrored a lot of this. Okay, so first of all, we have to have awareness of the people that we're getting in relationship with that are mirroring our programming. And then also, our survival behaviors. So we keep acting in certain ways because it's what kept us safe at one point and is now causing harm. And when we increase our awareness around those things, and then we identify the specifics that need to change, and then allow time for adaptation because we did not get programmed overnight. We're not going to reprogram overnight, which is commonly what happens. People will just give up and go back to what's familiar. So that's where the reprogramming can be difficult. But awareness, identification of change, and then adaptation, that is really the recipe for starting your reprogramming.
Yeah, and like you said, it is very important to know that it takes time. You know,
Yeah.
I really do feel like I have reprogrammed a good chunk of my brain when it comes to relationships as somebody who, had a lot of trauma around it. And it took a good chunk of time. And even then you're constantly working at it because
Yes.
your mind wants to deflect back to its old self. But I
Right.
do think that that's a very relatable thing for people, name of your podcast, that we find ourselves in the same pattern over and over and over and over again. I just do think it's hard for people to believe that they can actually reprogram.
Yeah. Because it's hard, because it requires action. So it doesn't matter how many podcasts you listen to, it doesn't matter how many books you read, it doesn't matter how many therapists you see. If you're not applying that knowledge that you're gaining, the reprogramming can't take place. And the hardest part of that is that forcing ourselves out of our comfort zone to do something that feels so uncomfortable and so even distressing sometimes, that's really hard. And we can compare it to losing weight or breaking a habit or, anything like that, that we exactly what you just said. We are drawn back to what's familiar. We're drawn back to what we're used to. But when we start to make it a habit and just pick something small to implement, just pick something that is just like a day-to-day thing, we're going to just slowly start to add in. It does, snowball over time. But that is my biggest takeaway. Like I can give all the knowledge in the world on attachment styles and programming and all of that. But my biggest takeaway is like, just pick something and do it. And that's where you'll get the change.
Yeah, I remember when I started this process, I had come out of an abusive relationship. This is back in the day. Listeners know about it, so I won't get into it. But it was very abusive, and when I came out, I totally identified. Oh my gosh, how could I get in this? Oh wow, this feels familiar with
Mhm.
sort of the chaos I was going through at home. And then I realized, like, okay, well, what's happening? And the first thing I noticed was, well, some part of me was scared of being alone.
Mm.
So I decided I'm going to train myself to learn to be alone. And so I started, my simplest step was I forced myself to go to movies by myself.
Mm.
And it felt so uncomfortable. And like I had never eaten by myself. It was just things
Ah,
that we're not trained to do.
sure.
And I would force myself to go do it, like sit at a restaurant by myself and eat
Yeah.
and not worry what people were thinking about me and learn to enjoy the meal. And same thing with the movie. The movie I very much remember because it was I don't know, it was the worst feeling in the world getting yourself up to go watch a movie by yourself in a movie theater.
Yes.
Because it feels like such a date activity or a friend activity. But when I did it, it felt amazing once I
Right.
became free of that.
Yeah.
And then fast forward in time, I like loved my time alone. And then I really, somebody needed to be of great value really for me to want to spend my alone time with them.
And I love that example because that really demonstrates the difference with programming versus traditional couples counseling or traditional therapy in general. Because what you're describing, definitely we could tie into attachment styles, the difference between like anxious and avoidant, but we can also tie that in culturally. So you being raised in a collectivist society and me being raised in an individualistic society, for me, it's the opposite. I'm like, I I have to force myself to be like, okay, fine, you can come over. Okay, fine, I'll go on a date. Like it is so the opposite because I feel so much safer being by myself and being alone. But that is what the reprogramming is, because in traditional therapy, they're going to give you and I the same, okay, here you go, here's your recipe. But with this relationship programming, no, we're going to understand what's specific to you, what's specific to me, and what changes those need to be made. And your example of the change is perfect. I mean, that's exactly it. Pick something when you know you're making choices about your relationships based in whether it is overly pursuing people or people pleasing, or okay, well then choose not to do that, whatever it looks like. But yeah, I mean, that's a great example
Yeah, and it's definitely it's all baby steps. So listeners,
for
just
sure.
keep like I appreciate you just saying that it takes some time and it takes a series of steps basically.
Yes. Yeah.
You also talk about sort of toxic cycles. What do
Right.
you mean by that?
So the toxic cycle can best be defined by what often happens is two people are in this like infatuation stage with each other, right? So it's like butterflies, head over heels. And then something happens, usually something minor, and it completely derails. So somebody will say something, the other person takes offense to it, it blows up into this big fight, which often results in separation. So if people are in a relationship, maybe that means somebody's sleeping on the couch, but if they don't live together, maybe they're not talking for days. So we're like tracking a cycle. So they're not talking, that separation happens, and then somebody will slowly put out feelers, and they'll kind of, maybe they're going to text something that's not too risky, but just kind of see what the response is. The other person will probably warm up, start that engagement. Nothing is discussed about the fight. Nothing is discussed about the dysfunction. But now we're like texting every day. And now we're back and sleeping in the same bed. We're back to infatuation. And then we know we get how the cycle goes. It's just going to happen again. This cycle is so common for so many people to really vacillate between that obsession and almost like that hatred. And it stays on loop.
Yeah, it really does. I was talking to a friend about this the other day, who was saying, because we were talking about forgiveness and forgetting,
Mhm.
and I said I forgive, but I don't usually forget, and then she was like, yeah, I had to learn for her because she kept getting back in these toxic cycles over and over again. She's like, I forget too much. So I started to write it down. And I said, yes, good, because that was also something I did, especially after sort of, getting into an abusive thing. I, even with him, would sometimes forget in a couple months, and that person was somebody who kept trying to come back in, and uh and I realized like, oh wait, it's okay sometimes to hold on to the anger because it's trying to protect you.
Yeah.
And so I had to, write things down to kind of end that toxic cycle. And again, just to have listeners understand that this can be broken.
Yeah.
um when I got engaged that week, or in the 2 weeks after we got engaged, I had 5 exes reach out to me in all different ways, like people I hadn't spoken to. I was like, huh? And people I saw outside randomly at like a restaurant. I was like, I didn't even know you were in the state anymore. Um, and I just didn't engage,
Yeah.
which, old you might have just like, even just to be polite or whatever, would have
Yeah.
re-engaged. I was like, I'm good,
Yeah.
moving
Yeah.
on.
So
So I do
tempting.
think that those things can be broken.
For sure. And that it ties into the programming as well. And for a lot of us, when we end up in those toxic cycles, it's because it's what we witnessed. So, I mean, my parents, they just got divorced maybe about 3 years ago. So, for over 30 years, they literally did this toxic cycle over and over and over. That it's my earliest memories. And so when I think about that and how I got into this work was not, I didn't even realize that. It was because I ended up in this a toxic relationship that I kept getting in these cycles. And, I usually identify as like a strong, independent woman. So I'm like, why the does this man keep sucking? Like, who are you? Like, you're nobody in that way. Like, why do you keep sucking me back in? And so I had to do research around it. And that is when I discovered the addiction that takes place and the pathways that are changed in these type of dynamics. And then that's also when I realized and started to form the model around programming was that the toxic cycle was my relationship programming. That is what I knew of how relationships operated in a state of chaos and then a state of infatuation and just vacillating between the two. But you're absolutely right. It can be broken. And we have to have the awareness first of where it's coming from. And then breaking the toxic cycle really is like breaking an addiction. Like there's withdrawal symptoms, all of that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you would suggest in sort of today's time because like now we have social media, everybody, it's just what do they call it? Haunting, where that ex is always just liking your posts.
Hmm.
Suddenly I remember back in the day with when Instagram first started, you could see who was what they liked.
Yeah.
Um, and it did become very addictive to want to know what they're doing all the time, them knowing what you're doing, and then trying to reach out. So, like, what do you suggest for people in that sort of loop right now?
Sure. So when you think of an alcoholic trying to stay sober, you can't hang out in a bar. You can't just take one shot. You can't, you're even the circle of people around you, you have to be aware of. And that is the analogy that I use because people can usually grasp that and they don't think of relationships in that way. But it's the exact same thing when you identify that this is toxic, this is not good for me, it's taking a toll on my mental health, then we need to remove it from your life. And so, no contact, as harsh as that is and as hard as that is, can actually be one of the most effective tools, but also unfollowing on socials. And sometimes it's blocking numbers, it's blocking on socials. And not, I know a lot of people, especially when they struggle with maybe codependency or people pleasing, they're like, but that's so mean. Like, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to hurt their feelings. If we can just look at it for a second, that it's not about being mean, it's about protecting yourself. And I know for me, like those are the things I have to do. I have to not be able to see what that person is doing because then I create these narratives and these stories and I end up hurting my own feelings. And I'm like, I just don't need to look at it. I don't need to know. And also, sometimes when we block a number, the helpful part of that is yes, if they have been reaching out, it protects us from that. But also, if they haven't been reaching out, or if they reach out very sporadically, it can help because you're not sitting there staring at your phone, wondering if it's going to light up. It takes all of that out of it and it frees up so much emotional space. So when I'm talking to people about breaking that, no contact if possible, like just no access to socials, no access to talking, all of that for a while.
Yeah, and I really do believe that I don't want to be mean thing, which I also used to subscribe to, is
Yeah.
bullshit, and it's just an excuse because are you also taking into consideration like are is that ex or is that person uh, valuing your feelings? Are they thinking about you when they're harassing you on social media, just trying to get back into your life? Like, no,
Yeah.
they're not. And sometimes, and also, like, when we're in relationships, when we go back into these toxic cycles, we say a bunch of shit to these people. We're not worried about being mean then. So let's stop
Totally.
acting like we're being martyrs now and like, I just want to be a good person and take the high road, which means I should talk to them. No, that shit.
Yeah.
That just means you want to talk to them. So
That's
admit
exactly
that
it.
you want to talk to them and that's fine. But
Right.
don't make it an excuse that you're worried about being mean suddenly.
Right. And that's exactly it. Yeah. And that is generally what it boils down to. I've been there. I have a lot of
Yeah,
clients who have been there. I'm like,
100%.
I want the attention. So I'm not,
Yes.
but the problem is the attention is most often breadcrumbing. And so it's enough attention to keep us hooked on them. It
Yeah.
is not enough attention to meet our emotional needs. And if you want to reprogram, if you want to get out of these cycles, you are going to have to do the hard thing. And the hard thing is to stop communicating with the person that's making your life a living hell.
Amen, sister.
Mic drop. That's it. We're done.
What are some of the five types of intimacy that you also talk about?
Yeah. So the five types that I talk about: physical, emotional, spiritual, experiential, and intellectual. And I talk a lot about this when I do intimacy coaching. Because often we get obsessed. We think intimacy means sex. Like that is, we think it's a synonymous thing. And so when we're trying to improve intimacy, we're not focusing on the right things. We're not really getting deep into what's going on. And so the types of intimacy are so important because people are aroused in different ways, that desire is formed in different ways. I talk about intellectual foreplay is my absolute favorite. That is you're going to turn me on with that way more than anything else. And so I help couples to gain awareness around, like, as you said at the very beginning, humans are complex. And that also means what turns us on. And so this awareness of these different types can be helpful for really strengthening a relationship, but also ultimately improving sexual intimacy, because when you're aroused from these other things, that's going to make sex a whole lot better.
It really does. As somebody who used to have a lot of frivolous sex, and I loved it, at some point I stopped loving it, not for nothing, but I just like felt nothing for the other person. And I
Right.
never thought I wanted to, but at some point, just sex is the same old shit over and over. And the only thing that kind of started making it stand out is if I liked them. And part of that was like building that intimacy with those people and going like, do I care about you? What do I care about you? And it made me want to try harder in sex,
Hmm.
like as in, to like enjoy it more, be more present, all that
Right.
stuff. So I do think that makes a big difference, and I appreciate you talking about that. Um, you talk about something else that I really want to discuss, which is you say that there are five overlooked and under discussed things in relationships.
Yeah.
Um, obviously, we're trying to reprogram ourselves. We want to start having healthier relationships. Tell us these secrets.
Yes. Well, it all ties into the programming. It ties into what we've been talking about, a portion of it, I guess. The first one is that not addressing our trauma and being aware of our triggers and what activates us, what puts us into our dysfunctional survival behaviors. That is first and foremost overlooked in not just society, not just social media, but actually with therapists, in the mental health field. That is often not given the attention that it needs. That the way that we show up in relationships has to do with our programming, but then also with our triggers. So that's the first and foremost, which I'm sure when you were going through a lot of your reprogramming, becoming aware of those triggers were so important.
Oh, definitely. You have to, but also, it happened in steps, right?
Yeah.
It's not like all I was aware of every single issue in the beginning. It was sort of like when you have a okay. This is a weird analogy, but I had a car accident where I had a head injury, a neck injury, and like whole thing down my left side, right?
Please.
But in the beginning, the only focus was my head because that's all like that was the most painful thing. And
Right.
then once I started working on that, then I was like, oh wow, my neck hurts. How come I didn't know my neck hurt this whole time? And they were like, oh, it's because we started taking care of the first problem that you started realizing what the next problem was. So it's
Yeah.
kind of, it felt like that, like an onion peeling in a sense that, when I was first coming out of it, there were the first things I became aware of, like, oh shit, this. Okay. And then as I started working on that and I got a grasp of it, a next thing I became aware of the next thing, and so
Right.
that awareness process continues to this day.
Yeah.
Now that I'm engaged, I'm like, oh my god, here's this other thing I realized. So
Yes.
it's a forever cycle, but yes, awareness is definitely key.
Right. And yeah, it's a lifelong journey. I mean, I'm on the same journey as everyone else, that as I heal something, as you're saying, I mean, hierarchy of needs. And so we start with the most pressing, and then we peel back the onion. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't start with anything. So they just keep operating through life with this up lens that is rooted in trauma, and often not even knowing that. And so that is like when we talk about where to start to fix your relationship, that's where to start. Become aware of your trauma, become aware of how it's coming up in your relationship. The second is increasing your emotional regulation skills. So when you are getting triggered, when you are feeling overwhelmed, you have to learn how to regulate that. Again, not something that is taught to many of us in childhood, not something that's role modeled. But we have to seek out the skills and the knowledge around that too.
Are there any things off the top of your head that people can do when they feel triggered?
Yeah. So the first thing that I suggest is that we have to become aware of what's going on in our bodies. We are a society of busy, so we are not stopping to check in on what that stomach pain means, what that headache means. Like, we don't have time for that. Like, we get on to the next. So we have to create time for that. And what I suggest is just 2 minutes a day, sitting down and doing what I call a body scan.
Mm.
So starting at the top of your head down to the tip of your toe, just really assessing what's going on in your body so that you get a baseline. Okay. Because then when we talk about triggers, all triggers start with a physiological reaction. So what happens is this the amygdala, the emotional center of our brain, is designed to store all sensory components of any experience. When we are then exposed to some type of any similar sensory stimuli that reminds us of that original trauma, our amygdala does not know the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. So it releases all of the biochemicals needed to send you into fight or flight. And so when we have that awareness that when we go into fight or flight, our body is reacting, because I mean, of course, your body was just flooded with hormones, with all the biochemicals. When we can become aware of what that does to our body specifically, that alerts us to I am triggered. Most of us just react and we don't even know, oh, I reacted because of this. So we have to start what's going on in our body. So I use the 3 W's is the tool that I give my clients. So the first W is what's going on in my body. So where is that reaction? For me, it's a specific stomach ache that takes place when I am triggered. And I know that alerts me to like, all right, slow the fuck down because you're about to do something wild. So like back it up. So then the second W is where is it coming from? So we're assessing like, okay, why am I feeling this way? What happened earlier in the day? What am I anticipating? And then the third W is what do I need? So how am I going to regulate? How am I going to pick the new behavior that I've been practicing that is really hard, but I'm gonna try it in this moment so that I can calm down. I mean, what I mean by regulate or is using a coping skill. So take some deep breaths, drink some water, have a snack, call a friend, whatever it is that just kind of changes the channel in your brain and allows your body to like, okay, I don't like what happened or what's about to happen, but in this moment, I'm safe and I'm okay. And let me get back into my logical brain to assess what to do. So that's kind of the tool I use for that.
Yeah, that's a great one. I even something as simple as walking away. Sometimes,
Mhm.
that can help. I know for me, as somebody who has had severe kind of panic attacks and anxiety in the past, I used to get told to, and it really worked for me. Hold on to a bag of ice.
Mhm.
And they said, just hold it for 30 seconds. And I was like, what the hell would that do? And then I realized like it just shocks your body because it's so cold.
Yeah.
So that last one of like do something really does hit me. What are the other ones that you mentioned? So those are two.
Yes. So also becoming aware of our wants, needs, and boundaries. So we have to identify, I have a whole activity that I take my clients through that I won't get into specifically, but it's identifying your 5 needs, 5 wants, and 5 boundaries in a relationship, whether you're single or in a relationship.
Mhm.
And knowing, so the needs being non negotiables, the wants being your preferences, and then the boundaries being deal breakers. Again, we generally do not take time to assess this. And so we're like, why am I so unhappy? And then when you really look at it, you're like, my partner doesn't, maybe they have 1 out of my 5 needs. They have like 2 of my wants. Um, but then that leads into the next one, which is that we do have to learn how to appropriately express that to our partner. And so once we have awareness around, or if you're, single, you make a visual of it that you have somewhere that you're looking at as you're going on dates. But we have to be able to then articulate what those needs, wants, and boundaries are in an appropriate and effective way, which can be really difficult when we don't have maybe a roadmap for that. But that ties, so that's 3 and 4 of know what you need and then learn how to express that.
And what's the fifth one?
Ties into the intimacy. So putting more focus on creating foreplay in all 5 of those areas. And so whether that's, so for intellectual, for me, that's like going to an art museum, that's going to the theater, that's doing something that we can then go to dinner afterwards over a glass of wine and we can, talk about what we just looked at and pick each other's brains and get into deep conversation around it. So that would be an example of intellectual foreplay.
I love that. I love it. Well, Dr. Fedrick, as we wrap out this episode, what's one actionable thing, listeners can do today or this week to start the reprogramming process for them?
Create your timeline. So sit down with a piece of paper, do it on the notes section of your phone if you want to do it on the couch. I don't care where you do it. Start at birth. What we don't remember birth. So what we've been told about birth, what the stories that have been shared with us, who was living in the home, all of that. And then track it so at birth and then go birth to 5, elementary years, middle school, high school, and then adult years. And start to identify what were the themes. So was it abandonment? Was it rejection? Was it performing for love? Like what were the things that were happening over and over? That is the first place to start.
Well, good luck, guys.
Yeah, no kidding.
Getting to that one. No, I think that's a really, really great activity to do because sometimes we don't know something until we like see it visually. I think sometimes we even replay stories in our head, but out of a timeline. And so we're hopping back and forth and it might just like all be jumbled and not make sense.
Right.
So I think that's a really cool exercise. I might try it myself.
And if you can't remember everything in exact order or things like that, totally fine. The biggest thing, and I have a lot of clients who will ask like, well, I can't remember anything from childhood, which is valid. If you were spending a lot of time dissociating, of course you can't. So try to remember of like how you felt. And even that will give us a good idea of what's going on and, why you are seeking the people that you're seeking currently.
These are amazing tips. This was such a great conversation, Dr. Fedrick. You're not totally done because we do something called 6 questions. We ask every guest the exact same 6 questions. So are you ready for your 6 questions, Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick?
Well, I mean, I guess we'll see. As ready as I can be.
Yeah, don't think about it too much. Here's your first question. What is the first thing you notice about a potential partner?
Their energy. So the way they carry themselves, their posture, just that energy they're putting out.
What is one deal breaker?
Being legally married. How about you sign your divorce papers before you hit on me? That's
a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
What turns you on?
Intellectual foreplay. I mean, all day, deep conversations.
That's a good one. What are one of your strengths and one of your weaknesses in relationships?
Yeah, good question. I would say that my strength is my awareness and my willingness to take accountability. Like I genuinely want to be the best partner and best, friend and mom and all of those things that I can be. So I have awareness around those things. I'm willing to work on what needs to change. And my weakness is that I'm also a firecracker. And so I have often very little patience and something I'm working on. But yeah, I am a feisty. So
love it. And awareness is key, like you said. What is love?
To me, love is a verb, really. Love is about action. It is that feeling that we have, but that is such a minor, that's 10% of it. And I really believe the other 90% of love is the action we put into showing that we care about somebody.
Good one. And besides I love you, what 3 words would you want your partner to tell you?
My favorite thing to hear is I got you. That is also one of my turn-ons, probably. You like it as well?
Yeah, that's mine too. I love it.
Yes.
Well, now we can say, thank you, Dr. Fedrick, for being on the podcast. Once again, where can everyone find you and all your work?
Yes. So my website is drelizabethfedrick.com. And then also on Instagram at Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. Spend a lot of time hanging out there. Lots of tips and content and talk a lot about relationship reprogramming on there as well. So if people want to know more, they can find it on there also.
Well, thank you so much again. It was a real joy to have you on and to help us kickstart 2024 with these great reprogramming tools. Friends, we're also on social. We're at Kinda Dating across the board. I'm at Natasha Chandel on Instagram and Facebook, Natasha.Chandel on TikTok. Thank you guys so much for downloading this episode. If you like something you heard, please remember to screenshot the episode and tag us on social media. Finally, I know it seems tough out there, but just try. Till next time. I hope you guys enjoyed that video and check out our next one. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to this channel for more amazing dating, love, and relationship advice from me and so many expert guests. Follow us on socials. We're at Kinda Dating across the board. I'm Natasha Chandel, so you can find me too if you like. And join our newsletter on www.kindadating.com for lots of exclusives. See you soon.